This week's Torah portion, following on the heels of Kedoshim of the Holiness Code of last week, is Emor, Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, chapters 21 to 23. And there's a few moments in this week's Torah portion that I personally wanted to focus on. So if you want to read along, I'm all the way at chapter 23. I jumped to chapter 23. The beginning of chapter 23 says, God spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of God that you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. Fixed times means the festivals, the moments, the sacred moments in which we set aside from the everyday and we celebrate something. In biblical times, all of them were tied, of course, to agriculture and the seasons of agriculture. And part of the genius of Jewish tradition, what Mordecai Kaplan intelligently called the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, part of what made our evolution happen successfully was we transvalued things, in Kaplan's words. We would take moments and rituals and traditions and customs and holidays and festivals, and when necessary, as we moved from one generation to the next, we would infuse them or overlay them, I would say, with new meaning that would be more relevant. So when we ceased to be an agricultural society, suddenly agriculturally based festivals no longer really spoke to us, and so we added new layers of meaning and connected them all to the experience of the Exodus and connected them to the fundamental spiritual and ethical values that have continued to be the foundation of Jewish civilization ever since. So here we begin in the Torah. God is laying out all of these festivals, these sacred times. And so the first one, of course, is the weekly festival, so to speak, of Shabbat. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest. A sacred occasion you shall do no work. It shall be a Sabbath of God throughout your settlements. That's not the part I was going to point out. The next part I want to point out. These are the set times, verse 4, these are the set times of God, the sacred occasions, which you shall celebrate, each at its appointed time. And verse 5 is actually the one I like the best. It says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to God. And on the 15th day of the month, God's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day you shall celebrate a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall make offerings by fire to God. The seventh day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. So, the reason I wanted to hold this particular section up is because of the words, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month. What month is the first month?
Rosh Hashanah.
Pop quiz. Okay. Someone said Rosh Hashanah. Rachel? No? You have to unmute.
Nisan?
Yeah, Nisan.
Yeah, Nisan. Nisan in the spring, which is a little confusing to most people, not to most of you because you're already pros at all of this, but to most people, if you say the month that Passover in is the first month, I go, what are you talking about? Rosh Hashanah is not in the spring. Rosh Hashanah is in the fall, in the Hebrew month of Tishrei. And I love this because it's a reminder of, again, not only the nature of what it means for a religious civilization to evolve, but also that things are not as simple as sometimes we think they are. In the Talmud and in Jewish tradition, we have 4 New Years. So there's this one, which appears to be the first month of the calendar, according to the Torah, in the spring, because that was, for surrounding civilizations, springtime, which is rebirth after winter. Every spring comes and you go, we lived through a winter. God forbid you don't have any crops to reap in the fall and you have a tough winter or you starve to death or whatever, which is when you're an agricultural society, every single year fear of will we have enough food to last for everybody through the course of the winter? Will some people starve to death? Will we not make it through the winter? Maybe not just because of food, because of all the other things that could happen during the winter. And then spring comes, and in most Near Eastern, Middle Eastern, civilizations, it marked the new year because it's made sense for it to mark the new year. It's renewal. We lived again. And so in Jewish tradition, the first day of the month of Nisan was called the New Year of Kings. The New Year of Kings because it was from the first day of the month of Nisan that the year of the reign of kings was counted. So, at a king visiting us in the United States, it's appropriate to talk about kings and kingship. In ancient Jewish tradition, in biblical tradition, if a king dies, gets killed and gets replaced, let's say February, whatever, or in the month of Adar, let's say before Nisan, when the first of Nisan comes, it's now marked the second year of the reign of that king, because every time the first of the month of Nisan comes, it counts as a new year of the reign of that king. So it was Nisan's the New Year of Kings, and is, as we just read in biblical terms, the first month of the year. Also because, let's see, look at verse 23 of chapter 23, where it says, God spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people thus, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion commemorated with shofar blasts, loud blasts. You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall bring an offering by fire to God. And then God spoke to Moses, saying, mark the 10th day of this 7th month is the day of atonement of Yom Kippur. So we all know that Rosh Hashanah is in the 7th month, which is the month of Tishri, and on the 10th day of that month is Yom Kippur. And between day 1 and day 10 is the period of our year that we call the days of awe, Yomim Noraim, the days of awe. That most sacred season of the entire year is in the 7th month, not in the 1st month. The 1st month is renewal, spring has come, and all those wonderful spring songs, and blessings and gratitude. And then we make it to the 7th month, and it's the new year of years, which we all know. So this year is, 5786? I think so, still. So when Rosh Hashanah comes, who knows? When's Rosh Hashanah this year? I didn't even look it up. 22nd? No. Never Rosh Hashanah comes. When's Rosh Hashanah coming this year? Yes. Susan.
September 11th.
Oh, September 11th. Okay. So September 11th, Rosh Hashanah, it's the 7th month. It's the new year of years, and it'll suddenly be 5787. That's number 2. It's not really number 2 in order, but that's the most famous new year, is the new year of years that we all know, because we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, we celebrate the new year every year. However, before that, the month before, the month before Tishri, is Elul, that preparation month. But the first day of Elul is called the New Year of Animals.
Oh.
Animals, as in humans and animals, because it was when you were supposed to bring the firstlings of animals to be offered as sacrifices. It was the New Year of Animals. We don't celebrate that anymore because we don't offer animal sacrifices anymore that I know of. And then what's the fourth one? Because everybody knows the fourth one, but it's not on the first of any month. It's on the 15th of a month, the fourth New Year. Anybody know? It's the 15th of the month of Shvat, and we call it Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is the New Year of Trees. The New Year of Trees happens to be on the 15th day of the month. It's when we it's the precursor of spring. Allegedly, the buds start to grow on the trees, and we celebrate Jewish Arbor Day, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. So we have these 4 New Years during the course of the year, and in this week's Torah portion, we have listed all of the festivals of the year. And if you kept reading, which I'm not going to right now, so I want to talk about something else, we list the festivals. We have Shabbat, we just read Pesach, we have the festival, the counting of the Omer, we have Shavuot, which is the festival of weeks. After 7 times 7 weeks, on the 50th day, we celebrate Shavuot, counting every day between Passover and Shavuot, which was originally a festival about the harvest of the spring-summer harvest, and when we were no longer agricultural, suddenly became about celebrating Natan Torah, the giving of the Torah. And so we go from Pesach, which is in our spiritual remodeling and renewing of what the festivals mean. We go from Passover, which is all about freedom, redemption, Exodus, slavery to freedom. We go from there to the 50th day of the celebration of the giving of the Torah. So we go from redemption to revelation. And, we have in the Torah, and how the rabbis read the Torah, they read the Torah by saying, God has certain overwhelming fundamental qualities, and God as Redeemer, and God is one of those fundamental qualities, and God who gives us the Torah, God as Creator, we do in Genesis, God as Redeemer, we do from the Exodus, and then God who gives us the way of life, the Torah itself, and the 613 mitzvot, and all that goes into creating the fabric and the foundation and the structure of Jewish civilization is also associated with this is one of God's fundamental qualities. And so the rabbis in the rabbinic period, after the destruction of the temple, had to bring new meaning to all of the festivals and all of the Jewish rituals that we had up to that date. It's part of what makes continue to here we are thousands of years later, still reading the same texts and still finding new meaning in what they are. So in this week's portion, we talk about Shavuot, we talk about what you just did, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then Sukkot, the Feast of Booths. And the description here that God says we celebrate Sukkot because during the Exodus, God says, I made everybody live in these temporary dwellings, and we are reminded of the fragility of life and the blessing of home, and that home isn't about physical structure. Home is where you are, wherever you may be, and certainly for the Jewish civilization and Jews who have been wandering all over the world for the last couple thousand years, we know that we carry our Judaism with us. When I was a student in my junior year of college, I spent the year in Israel, and I had the privilege of spending an evening with Israel's leading Talmudic scholar of the time, Adin Steinsaltz. And Rabbi Steinsaltz, in an era when we had just met with David Ben-Gurion, it was quite the year, met with David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, and David Ben-Gurion talked to my small group of college students who were spending a year in Israel, exhorting us that we should all move to Israel. He said, the only thing Israel needs is you to literally be here. This is your homeland, and this is where you need to be. And the next week, we were meeting with the preeminent scholar of Talmud and Adin Steinsaltz. And Adin Steinsaltz, as opposed to Ben-Gurion, said, the homeland of the Jewish people is history. He said, the homeland of the Jewish people is history. We carry our homeland with us. When you look at our thousands of years of Jewry, it wasn't, of course, and he was, of course, living in Israel, and he was an Israeli. He said, yes, this is where we started, but our homeland has been wherever we are. And wherever we are, we create our own version of vibrant Judaism. And that's the secret of Jewish survival, he said, is that we don't need just one place. It's not about the place. Just like home is not about the place. I mean, most of us, gone through the trauma of this past year of losing our homes one way or another. Physically, literally lost our home, or even for those whose homes are still standing, most of them are not back in their homes. This sense of displacement, which is in quite the trauma. And as I said, Didi and I bought this condo because it's the third place we lived in the last year. And when we were renting, and I want to actually live somewhere, and was in process, so we bought this place. But we still know that we love the condo, we furnished the condo, we've been doing trauma retail therapy for the last year. All we've been doing is just buying stuff, which is lovely. I like to buy stuff, and we have a lovely home. But we've always known wherever the two of us are, if we're together, that's where our home is. And it's the same written large for the Jewish people. Wherever the Jewish people gather is our home. We have a beautiful synagogue. You'll see the beautiful, hopefully, renovation of the sanctuary, a renewal. It's like pushing a reset and a renewal for the 21st century. I'm very happy with and very excited about. Keeps the fundamental nature of the sanctuary that those of us who were involved in the creation of it particularly wanted, that sense of community and creating it in the round and creating it so that when you walk into the sanctuary, you're walking up a ramp, and therefore the whole sanctuary is the bima itself, rather upon the bima and everybody else somewhere else. I mean, it was our notion of how to emphasize what we thought were the most important values of community, which is community itself, and the sharing of that space. And that's remains exactly the same. We knew the ark was falling apart, new ark anyway. So, and in fact, the design has made it even more welcoming, and more open, and a greater sense of. So, but that's the nature of Torah. Why you all show up every Shabbat, other than that you like Rabbi Bernstein. But we show up, we delve, we read the same words over and over again for thousands of years. The words don't change, we change. The words don't change, our setting changes. The words don't change, the era changes. And therefore, they become renewed, and they become even more powerful. Now, I want to go to what I care about the most in this Torah portion, which is right above where we left off. Still in chapter 23, verse 22. Most of you will go, oh yeah, well, of course he likes this one the best. So here's the passage I like the best. When you reap the harvest of your land, You shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the eternal, am your God. That, to me, is one of the most powerful passages in the entire Torah. It is a reflection of one of the fundamental values that we cherish in Torah, and Susan's Torah portion for her bat mitzvah. Mine was mishpatim. So here's what's interesting. If you are a student of Torah, one of the things that you discover is that both in the Torah and in the later rabbinic period, the rabbis were intelligent enough to recognize that if the Torah says you shall do something, we have positive and negative commandments, right? We have, you should honor your father and your mother, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, and you should do that, and you should do this, and you should do that. And then we have a whole bunch of negative commandments. Don't do this, and don't do that, and don't have idolatry, and don't do all the negative commandments. So the rabbis recognized that if there's a positive commandment, like this one is a positive commandment, when you reap the harvest of your field, it's both a positive and negative. But fundamentally a positive commandment that says, leave the edges of your field unharvested. That's the commandment, right? When you reap the harvest of your land, on the assumption there will be a harvest, you don't reap to the very edges or gather the things that just fall. That's the gleanings by themselves. Leave them for the poor and the stranger. That's the commandment. And the rabbi said, if there's a positive commandment, the reason that the commandment is there is why? It's because without the commandment, people aren't likely to do it. If it says do this, it's because people aren't doing it. If it says don't do this, it's because people are doing it. That the natural urges of human beings sometimes are not our best, the best versions of ourselves. And so they divide all of the mitzvot and all of the commandments, both of the Torah and of later rabbinic period, as the rabbis took passages from the Torah and expanded on them, which is why the Talmud is 20 volumes long, ultimately based on the same 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and then the rabbis having their conversations and their arguments and their disagreements about what does this really mean, what does that really mean, and what does this really mean, and then having votes on them essentially. The most famous ones are the disagreements between Hillel and Shammai, the house of Hillel and the house of always wins. But what makes our Talmud 20 volumes, literally, and what makes us the kind of civilization that we are is that we have shown respect for dissent and disagreement. We do not insist there's only one version. In fact, there's multiple versions of most things and most discussions. And so we quote all of the assertions of the house of Shammai, even if they're not the ones we pick. The simple and famous one that everybody knows is the Hanukkah, disagreement between Hillel and Shammai. And of course, the Shammai version said, well, when Hanukkah starts, there's 8 days, and so you should left of Hanukkah, so Hanukkah with 8 candles. And the next day there's only 7 days left, so you should have 7 candles. And the next day there's 6 days left, so you should have 6 days. On the last day, it's 1 day, and so you should have 1 candle. And of course, Hillel said the opposite. Day 1, you start with 1 candle. Day 2, you put 2 candles in. Day 3, you put 3 candles in. And on day 8, you have all 8 candles. And since we all know that that's the way we do it, and that Hillel wins that particular disagreement, And we light the candles one and add, and the reason that they gave, that Hillel gave, that we quote all the time, is because the candle flame itself is a symbol of holiness. We light candles for holiness, and that you never want to diminish holiness. Therefore, by starting with 8, and then doing 7 and 6 and 5, you would be diminishing holiness. So, and in fact, we know, that we have a particular relationship with human beings with flames. Coming off of the last year or so, some of us had a very negative relationship to flames. And we know that flames and fire is actually one of the most powerful and most poignant and appropriate sort of symbols of blessings and curses at the same time. That fire is fire. It's not a blessing or a curse, except for in what happens with it. When it's cooking your food, it's a blessing. When you're lighting it on your birthday cake, it's a blessing and it's a symbol of blessing. When it burns your home down, obviously it's a curse. And that's so much of what life is about. I'm big on reminding myself and everybody else that, as the Torah teaches, life is filled with blessings and curses. You don't get to have one or the other. Deuteronomy, we often quote the passage, one of the most famous passages in the Torah, that says, "See, I set before you this day, good and evil, blessing and curse, life and death. Therefore choose life." It's one of those famous passages. And so I always point out that it doesn't say one or the other. It doesn't say blessing or curse, life or death, good or evil. It says blessing and curse, good and evil, life and death. Because just like with the analogy, you get it all. All of us have all of it. You don't get to have one without the other. Nobody just has good in their life. Nobody just has blessings in their life. Often in this past year, I've been using my hands as an example to who haven't been going through what we've been going through. Ask me, what's it been like? And I say, well, in this hand I have gratitude, and in this hand I have trauma. And what I've been doing all year is trying to move the trauma one farther away and the blessing one closer, knowing both of them. They're still both there. But what I want to focus on is the blessing part, that I'm okay, that we're alive, that we lived through it, that some people didn't, that we're precious and irreplaceable, as opposed to the stuff that I could just buy that is replaceable. Those things that all of us who lost things lost because when we evacuated, we didn't think it was forever, and if we'd known it was forever, we would have taken different things, and everybody says that. It was the past year. Yes, and felt a little guilty that I didn't take this or I didn't take that, even though it's irrational, because I didn't think it was going to be forever, as all of us didn't. So we have both. We have blessing and curse. We have good and evil. We have both of them. And that's the way life is forever. And with Jewish tradition and in this week's Torah portion, God says, set these times as regular times of sacredness and holiness. Just like Shabbat. Look, here we are. We're about to enter Shabbat. What makes Shabbat Shabbat? Why is it sacred? Why is the Kiddush cup sacred? It's because of what I always called our superpower. Human beings have a superpower, and our superpower is we are meaning makers. We are the meaning makers. But that's what we do. We are the Harry Potters with our own little wand, and we go zip, and suddenly any cup becomes a sacred object. If it's a beautiful ordained silver cup and it looks like a beautiful Kiddush cup, it's easy to say, this is our sacred object. But if, you're at summer camp, a Jewish summer camp, sitting under a tree on Shabbat with a song leader playing guitar and passing out, grape juice in a Dixie cup, and we go, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, and suddenly that Dixie cup becomes a sacred object because we say so. Equally sacred with the beautiful silver Kiddush cup. It's the same thing. And all of life is that way. And so when the Torah says set these times apart, like Shabbat, Shabbat is Shabbat because we say so. Shabbat is Friday night to Saturday night because we say so. Or not. It's like Havdalah. Havdalah, which marks the separation between Shabbat and the week ahead. And we have these rituals, and there's this whole conversation in the Talmud among the rabbis who say, well, when are you supposed to do Havdalah? And because nobody wants Shabbat to end, part of the conversation is, well, you can push it off as long as you can push it off, because then Shabbat's still happening. Maybe till like Tuesday noon. It's like literally they have this conversation of how long can you wait to do Havdalah and therefore still have this, I got the Shabbat feeling all over me. Like we sing sometimes with kids, I got that Shabbat feeling all over me. Right? That's because we make meaning. That's what we do. We say, okay, this means that. And that's our power. And so from Torah on, from this week's Torah portion on, literally God says, you have the power. This is spiritual empowerment. You have the power to say collectively, this particular moment in time means this. That particular moment in time means that. This particular moment in time, you're going to have Passover. This particular moment in time, you're going to call Yom Kippur and make it the most sacred day of the year. Manishtana, why is that day different from any other day? Because we all agree it is. It's the only reason. The day isn't any different. The sun rises, the sun sets, and, as Ecclesiastes says, and there's nothing new under the sun, except that we make it so. Yes, there's nothing new under the sun. The sun comes up, the sun goes down if you're lucky, and then we say, this moment means this. And suddenly it does. That's our superpower. And when we do it, when we all agree collectively, that becomes the power of the community to exercise a collective superpower and say, this is the most sacred day of the year. And Passover is the holiday that more people celebrate than any other Jewish holiday of the year. And whatever. So for us, Shabbat is Friday night to Saturday night. For Christians, it's Sunday, the sacred day. Is it any different? Because they say so. For them, suddenly that's the sacred day. Who says so? Well, they get to say so. Anybody else gets to say whatever they want to say and bring meaning into that moment, into that ritual, into that cup, into anything that we do. Into the Torah. We carry the Torahs around. I was so relieved that the synagogue didn't burn down. First of all, everybody took all the Torahs out anyway, beforehand, just in case. We evacuated all the Torahs. Gone. So I have my own little Torah in my office. My office is still there. My ark is still there. Somebody has my Torah. My Torah will be put back in my office. And when it's there with that ark, to me, my office becomes a sacred space. And in part because of the Jewish ritual objects that are in there. When they all disappeared from my home, I was at least blessed with the gift of whatever's still in my office is still there. I don't even know what's there because I haven't seen it in 15 months or whatever. But sometime in the next week, stuff will come back and I'll be able to say, oh, look, this talit is here. Thank goodness. This Kiddush cup is here. This yad for the Torah is still here. Because I know what I lost. Yeah. Are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Yes, dear.
Because I wanted to say, and having you here today, recounting the lifeblood and the basic tenets that apply to us all makes me feel like I'm home again.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Steven. You just managed to capture not only the Torah portion, but our lives and all that's happened. And it's a wonderful in-depth, in-life time for us. Thank you so much. Mazel tov.
That's right.
Very sweet of you. Thank you. We all have our own approach. If you go to Torah study with me or Torah study with Amy or Torah study with Daniel, it's like it's a whole different experience, even though the Torah is the same, which is what I've been talking about, frankly. The Torah doesn't change, but we bring ourselves to that. We bring ourselves to these holidays. We bring ourselves to those rituals. And the whole purpose of ritual, why are these rituals in here, in this Torah? Well, it's because this is what builds community. Think about as if this were history for a moment. It's not exactly, but think about as if the Torah were history. Who is this? Who is God speaking to? God is speaking to the remnants of hundreds of years of enslavement in a foreign country. God is speaking to people who, according to Jewish tradition, there were certain things that we did even in our enslavement that merited us being redeemed, and one of them was we kept our Hebrew names, which was very powerful because it's a symbol of your Hebrew name. If you have a Hebrew name, your name is your full Hebrew name is your name, the son or daughter of your parents' names. Costa Rica in a couple weeks and doing 2 baby namings while I'm there. And part of the process of getting these babies' names and what's the name of their parents and creating a certificate for them that's, Shmuel ben so-and-so and Nurit bat so-and-so. And so the power, when the rabbis say, one of the fundamental things that we did even in our enslavement that merited our redemption was that we kept our Hebrew names. It was because your very keeping of your Hebrew name is an assertion of relationship with the past and connection to the past. It's not just me. It's me, the son of someone. Me, and instantly, even in just reciting my name, I'm invoking the previous generation, simply in doing that. And so that's powerful. And here God is speaking to this remnant, supposedly a lot of them, but still a remnant of hundreds of years of enslavement and of disconnection. And the purpose of the Torah, in many ways, is the creation of Judaism as a civilization. The creation of Judaism, the Jewish people, the Israelite Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, as a self-conscious community. How do we build a self-conscious community? We do it by shared rituals and shared moments of sacredness and holiness that we all agree upon, so that once we go through a year after year of showing up on Rosh Hashanah, having a Passover Seder, and knowing that all around the world Jews are doing this, and now with the internet, literally people anywhere in the world are sharing these moments together. It's like crazy, literally. You have services, and because you're streaming them, people anywhere in the world are watching these services, and it's happening with congregations all over, or listening to the Torah studies, or, because we have a podcast and we publish them on the internet, and people do. I don't know, Bert can tell you probably how many countries people have listened to, different countries people have listened to, Amy's teachings and whatever's going on that we put on our podcast. But that's how you build community. So one of the underlying principles and reasons for all of these laws and rules, all the holiness code of last week, and all the sacred occasions and dates of this week's Torah portion, this is how you build a cohesive community that recognizes who belongs and who doesn't, who's in and who's out. Those who are in are those who keep these, those who do these rituals. That's the ins. Those who are out are those who say, Never mind. It's not me. Not me. So but in order to do that, you have to have these markers in time, markers of rituals, markers of ritual objects that you all agree, this is a sacred object, talit is a sacred object, this kippah becomes a sacred object, whatever. By agreement, you reinforce your sense of belonging and your sense of connection. And this is literally where we started. Literally the foundation of all of those 3,000 years now of subsequent Jewish history, and why we're still together, and why Adin Steinsaltz could say the homeland of the Jew is history. It's because whether we're in the Ukraine, or whether we're in Pacific Palisades, or whether we're in wherever you happen to be, or whether we're in whatever country, we keep the same days. We recognize and acknowledge the same sacred moments that are listed in this week's Torah portion, and the mitzvot of holiness and of caring for the poor that we just read, that becomes this one sentence, literally becomes the foundation of all of the subsequent Jewish social service organizations in the modern world ever since. It's recognizing that we are commanded to feed the poor and the stranger. It says the poor, which we presume is our own people, and literally says, countered in our society today, the stranger, that we have a responsibility to the stranger. And so many times in the Torah, we all know, it says, God gives some commandment and says, because you were strangers, you should treat the stranger as the homeborn. Why? Because you know what it's like to be a stranger. Because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. It's the recurring theme, one of the fundamental recurring themes of the Torah is seeing ourselves as strangers and not as only the privileged non-stranger now. And why is that repeated so many times in the Torah? It's because of what I said earlier. It's not, as you can see by what's happening in society today, it's not necessarily human nature to embrace the stranger. The stranger is a source of fear. The stranger is other. The stranger may be coming to kill us. The stranger may be all of these, everything that's not us, undermine our society, who knows what. And so, Moses, God, whoever wrote the Torah, over and over and over again says, I know that's your natural instinct is to pull back from the stranger, so I'm commanding you to embrace the stranger, to bring the stranger into your home, to feed the stranger, in spite of your natural instinct to go, stay away from me. And that's the wisdom of our ancestors, to recognize that the Torah is building a society based on fundamental ethics that will elevate the human soul and the human spirit and elevate us to what are best angels, that to be the best versions of ourselves. What's the best versions of ourselves? And in theory, the Torah is trying to speak to the best versions of ourselves, which is to open our borders, to welcome those who are poor, the widow, the stranger, the homeless, and to feed them. And throughout the Torah, as you know, you had it last week, we are commanded to do those things. And we're commanded to do it because it's not our national instinct. Anybody have anything they would like to either ask or comment about?
I've got a question.
Yes.
It just occurs to me, another word for stranger is, in our current vocabularies, mine, is bias, is confronting bias, which is, to me, a version of stranger. I just got it from listening to you. I wonder if you have comments about that, because boy, that's just predominant. We all have biases, and to confront every day your biases and acknowledge them and somehow recognize I can't get rid of them, but I have to take them into consideration. And that's also kind of a form of still having fear of the stranger in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree. One of our challenges is recognizing that there's more than one way to listen, just one right way. We have, because of the internet in many ways, to constantly search for reinforce our own thoughts and our own ideas and our own perspective, as if there's only one right version. And part of what brings society more together is experiencing life and at the world. Two people have raised their hand. Lynn, with somebody.
Hi. Good to see you. Yeah. You hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
What I really like about what we're talking about humans investing meaning into ritual, into object, is I'm always thinking about this, especially like as I'm going into some kind of Jewish context, is why does this mean anything to me when I don't believe it's something that God commanded? So It's like, if you don't believe that keeping Shabbat is a commandment from God, then why do it? And there's a disconnect. And I think the idea of, well, we've collectively invested this object or this thing with meaning. And so therefore it gives me something, the experience gives me something that in and of itself is legitimate. And I don't have to feel like I'm taking two different sides of a coin.
Right. Well, when I wrote my brilliant book, A Year with Mordecai Kaplan, Wisdom of the Weekly Torah Portion, I realized that my favorite quote from Mordecai Kaplan was when he said, the greatest challenge of the modern Jew is to learn how to take the Torah seriously without having to take it literally.
Yeah.
And that's always our challenge. How do we take seriously the values, the ethics, the foundation of even something thousands of years old without having to be stuck in the literalness of it, recognizing that some person wrote all this stuff. Mm-hmm. It didn't drop him in. So
that was Kaplan. Wait, can I add one thing then? That was Kaplan?
Yeah.
Because there's a show on Netflix, which I love, which is from Australia, called You Can't Say That, or You Can't Ask That. And it was a series, and they would have people on each week of a certain kind of thing, and then members of the community could submit questions to them. So one of them were clergy members, and there was some priest who said that.
There we go.
Like, okay, if the priests are saying this now.
And the Kaplans are saying it. Yeah, Lynn, you had something.
Yeah, let's see. Jews have always been confronting animosity. And I would think that the Torah might have added a word like the well-intended stranger, the friendly stranger, the safe stranger, So it seems to me that just the stranger could be given today and back then. It could have been less naive.
Okay. I think that mostly it's because the opportunity with all of the audience here is people who just escaped from slavery. And so the opportunity to remind us for the future what it was like to be oppressed and to always feel like the other and always feel like the stranger is something that when we become successful, it's easy to forget our roots. And so part of that is that you don't have to warn people about being afraid of other people because that's our default. We're going to be afraid of them anyway and wary of them. What you have to command people to do is to pay attention that not everyone is that, and see if you can see strangers in a different light. Remember, Brent, you had something?
A while ago when you were talking, you mentioned that when the rabbis were working on the Talmud or even working on the Torah, the Jews went from an agricultural society to what? And they weren't quite an industrial society. And what time frame are you talking about?
Well, biblical times everything was agriculture, and then as we started moving into communities and cities, we started, you were the sandal maker, or you were the whatever you were making, and that was a slow. I mean, I'm not a historian, so, but as by the time you were in the rabbinic period, like when around the turn of the millennium, even in Jesus's time, so to speak, when you had people living in cities, it's different. You had some people that were still raising crops, and you had other people, whatever happens in communities and cities to keep people building, the people that were doing the building and people that were doing the everyday process of living out of, not tied to the cycle of agriculture. when the temple was destroyed in 70 and we were taken into exile, and some who stayed behind were studying Torah still, and those who were taken away wasn't into agriculture. You had to find new meaning when we were no longer simply an agricultural society. You had to find new meaning. They assigned new meaning. And it's been happening ever since. I'll take a few more questions. Whoever had a question.
Okay, so I'm curious why now in terms of the way where this is located in the text and the context.
Why this? Why now? I don't have an answer. In the context, the rabbis, one of what they call hermeneutical principles, which are the principles of Torah commentary, in the Talmud, the rabbis, one of their principles is ein mukdam u'machar the Torah. There's no earlier or later in the Torah, because they recognize that things are not necessarily simply following a logical, rational, process of time. That suddenly you'll be talking about one thing in the Torah, and suddenly you go back to God showing up, giving different laws or different rules, or suddenly they start talking about the Mount Sinai, or suddenly they'll be talking about things. It's not a history book. It's not a history book. It's got some sense of history, a sense of progress, but that's not what it is. It's a spiritual metaphor book about the creation of where we came from and where we're going. And it ends at a particular moment, after all. It's the Torah that gets through Deuteronomy and on the edge of about to go into the promised land and never gets there. I mean, and so we read it again, never gets there. So there isn't always a logical, rational reason why all of a sudden that showed up in the Torah, and even the rabbis of the Talmud, right? There's no earlier or later in the Torah. It's just all Torah. So I don't have an answer of why this, why now.
Can I just follow up with, so these last few portions have come after Exodus.
Yeah.
And was this because, I hear what you're saying, so likely no, but that the people needed a reminder, and then the continual reminder, like almost like the laws need to be woven in throughout, because humans by nature just don't follow them. And so there needs to be continual reminders woven through the text.
Yes. And look, they went from about to get to the promised land. Actually, they went to getting to the promised land to having to then wander for the next 38 years. So they were right there. They were on the edge. They were there. They got there. They sent those spies into the land. They all came back terrified and said, they're as big as grasshoppers, et cetera, et cetera. And God said, okay, you're not ready for this. Turn around and spend the next 38 years wandering in the desert, creating the opportunity not only for one generation to die out so that a tougher generation will emerge, but also the time to build the values and the rules and the laws that would be the society when you get into the promised land, because so many of the rules and laws actually begin with when you go to the promised land and you raise these crops and you do this or you do that or you do that. So that's the cauldron in which the soup of what was Jewish society, Israelite society going to be, needed to be formed. So all of that, and Leviticus is the book that it's not about when, it's about what. And the what is, here are all the rules, and here are all the laws, and here are all the ways you're supposed to create your society so that when you get there, you know what to do.